Hey everyone, I'm Ben. Thanks for joining us for today's message. We want to encourage you to go online at www.7sdchurch.com to see more about who we are or to give to the ministry financially. In this series, Change from the Inside Out, we explore the ways that Christ's transformational power changes our lives. Thank you.
Go ahead and have a seat, guys. Good morning. I'm Pastor Kelvin. I'm one of the pastors here at 7. And this morning, I have the privilege of introducing our guest speaker. Podium come up here. Pastor Jeremy is in the high desert right now. He's doing what's called an ordination for a friend. A friend up there who is in the ministry with him up there is becoming a pastor. And you go through an ordination process, and it takes a committee of people and interviews and all different things. And Jeremy's taking part in that this weekend. So that's where he's at. He'll be back next week. But it worked out really good because this is a friend of mine, Phil. Phil and I have known each other for 24 years. 24 years. We met way back in January 91 on a missions trip to the Philippines playing basketball together. So his qualification to preach here is good. He's over 6 foot tall, so he's part of the tall crew. But you're in for a real treat this morning. Phil and I have known each other for a long time. We don't see each other very much because he lives in Australia, down in Sydney. A long time ago, quick story, I grew up in Sydney in a house, lived in the house for 20 years before I came here. My dad lived there for 40 years. And Phil actually bought our childhood home a few years back and fixed it up and sold it and moved on, but spent some time in my childhood home. So it's kind of a weird connection there, how that all happened. But we know each other for a long time, and Phil has been a big impact in my life. I got to say this out in public sometimes. He was one of the mentors in my life. I know if you've heard me preach before here a while back, I talked about him a little bit, didn't mention his name, but that's who I was talking about. Had an impact along with the coach I played for in college and my dad. Phil had a huge impact in my life back in a crucial time when my mum had just passed away back in 1991. So you're in for a real treat this morning. Phil Shepherd.
Well, thank you, and it is just an incredible privilege to be with you this morning. I do really bring you greetings from Sydney, Australia. It is just a delight to be here. You know, I get to travel a little with my job, and I never cease to be both amazed and encouraged by the fact that when believers connect anywhere in the world, there is something incredibly special about that which we have in common in Jesus. And so it's a delight to be with you this morning. Is for you. I think if I understand it right, you have engaged in a series in recent weeks, and I think it's written up here. What does it mean to be changed? And here's the thing, grab this if you can. Part of being changed, one of the most critical and integral parts of you and I being changed people, is this, that we can know and know for sure. We can actually do that here this morning. We can know for sure that God never forgets us. Never will he ever forget us. So rip a little verse. Just want to share one verse with you to help us explore this a little bit this morning. And it's in the 12th chapter of Luke. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that for those of you who don't have something to write on, if anybody wanted to grab a notepad, there are some notes we prepared that might be able to help you remember some of the things. If someone wants that, the guys are going to hand that out along with a pen. I do apologize for not mentioning that a little earlier. The verse we're talking about is in Luke chapter 12, and it's verse 6, and it just very simply says this, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and not one of them is forgotten before God. 5 sparrows, 2 pennies, and yet not one of them, say the word with me, is forgotten by God. I love that thought, and in recent times I've been very much asking myself the question, what is it that this verse actually means? And I found myself wondering, why would Jesus choose a sparrow? Why would he choose a sparrow? Of all things, why would he choose a sparrow as a metaphor for that which is easily forgotten? Now, I'll tell you a little secret this morning. I am no ornithologist, and for those of you who don't know what that is, an ornithologist is literally someone who's committed to the study of birds. But thanks to Google, I can tell you a few things about sparrows, and I've come up with a few reasons why sparrows might be easily forgotten. The first is this. Sparrows are easily forgotten because they are absolutely everywhere.
Absolutely everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's a sparrow. We saw some at a restaurant we were in last night, dancing around the floor, chasing up the crumbs. They're everywhere. You may know this. The sparrows are a family of small passerine birds, which interestingly are genetically related to dinosaurs. Go figure. And they range in size. The little chestnut sparrow is, I think, about 4.5 inches in height or length. It weighs less than half an ounce. And right up to the largest one is called the parrot-billed sparrow. You never thought you'd get a lesson on sparrows here this morning, did you? And this is a sparrow that's about 7.5 inches, weighs 1.5 ounces. What distinguishes sparrows from other seed-eating birds, a finch or a budgerigar, that type of a bird, is that they have a vestigial dorsal outer primary feather and an extra bone in their tongue. You didn't know that, did you? There you go. And sparrows are the most familiar of wild birds. They're absolutely everywhere. The most common sparrow is, of course, the house sparrow, but there are many, many different sparrows. Let me just give you a few to give you an indication. There's the Spanish sparrow, the Somali sparrow, the plainback sparrow, the Dead Sea sparrow, the Kenya sparrow, the Cape sparrow, and so the list goes on. The Swahili sparrow, the desert sparrow, the Eurasian tree sparrow, even the Arabian golden sparrow. Sparrows are literally labelled according to their place of residence, and they are absolutely everywhere. And yet this verse tells us not one of them, not a single sparrow, is forgotten by God. Second reason that I came up with sparrows are easily forgotten is because they are regarded as pests. Third reason that I want to suggest sparrows might be easily forgotten is, and it's Jesus himself who gives us this kind of little tip or a hint, is this, that sparrows are cheap. They're virtually worthless. How do we know that? Well, there's a verse in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 29. The first part of the verse says, you can buy 2 sparrows for a penny. I don't know about you, but a penny is not worth a lot of money. In fact, the Greek word for penny is a word called phenon, which literally means the cheapest brass Roman coin you can find. So for the lowest piece of coinage, there is no lower value coin, you can buy not 1 but 2 sparrows for 1 coin. And then the verse we read earlier in Luke says that we can buy 5 sparrows for 2 pennies. So this is how worthless sparrows are. If you buy 4 of them, you'll get 1 thrown in for free. That's how cheap sparrows are. And here's the thing, I love the thought that God doesn't forget that 5th sparrow. He doesn't forget it. The last reason that I want to suggest sparrows are easily forgotten, frankly, they are ordinary and plain and boring. And in the second part of that verse we looked at a moment ago in Matthew 10:29, this is Jesus speaking, and he says this. He says, yet not one of them, talking about sparrows, not one of them will fall to the ground and die. I love that. Imagine this afternoon that you say, right, we finish church and we go home. I don't know what you do on Sundays. You go home and you have lunch. You sit down there with the family and say, right, what are we going to do this afternoon? Oh, I might go for a walk. And so you head out for a walk and you and God go out for a walk. There's a novel thought. And you go down to the local park or down to the beach, I don't know, Coronado Beach, and you're walking along there and you're just kind of walking along with God, and all of a sudden God says, hey, what was that? You look around and you say, what? He said, did you hear that? You look at God and say, what are you talking about? And he says, over there. And you look, and over there on the ground is a solitary dead sparrow. You didn't hear it, but God heard it hit the ground and die. You say, what a sparrow? Well, who cares? We think nothing of it. You see a dead bird on the side of the road, if you even see it, and who cares? Let me tell you, God cares. God cares, because not one of them will hit the ground and die without him knowing. The very next verse in Luke goes on to say, not only do sparrows count, but the very hairs of your head and my head count. They're numbered. Now, I know in my case that count is not particularly high, but let me tell you, as I look around some people here this morning, that count would be substantial. God knows how many hairs are on your head. That's how well he knows you. in comparison to a sparrow. Let me ask you a question. How do you go about remembering things? Are you one of those families who somewhere at home you've got, you walk over to your fridge and just before you open it, you've got the big kind of the mini whiteboard on the fridge, the calendar in the pantry, or maybe it sits on your bench. And what do you do with those? You know, you go over there and you write in there the really important events for the family, you know. It might be, birthdays or events you've got to go to, and you've got to get the form back to school. Maybe the shopping list is over here on the side. You write up stuff on the calendar that's important, things you want to remember. Or if you don't do that, you ever do this? Somebody tells you something, you grab a quick scrap bit of paper and you write it down and you kind of hang on to the paper and then you're looking for the bit of, if you're like me, you're looking for the bit of paper later and you can't find it anywhere. If you're really high tech, you take out your device and you say, now what did you just say again? And you put a little note into your phone, or your iPad. But let's just assume for a moment that all of those options are absent and somebody's telling you something that is critically important. It's a phone number, or it's a time, or a date, and what do? You ever done this? You ever taken out a pen? And what'd you say again? And as they give you the phone number, you write it down on the palm of your hand. You ever done that? And so I write it down. The reason, of course, you do that is because you know when you see it later on, you're going to look at it and you go, wow, yeah, that's right, that's really important. You see it there. And then you do what I do and you go home and you have a shower and you don't realise, but you wash, oh no, I've lost the vital piece of information. Here's a verse I want to share with you. Love it. Great verse from Isaiah 49. And this is what God says that he does about you and I. He says, I have engraved you on the palm of my hand. That word engraved there, if you look at it in the Hebrew, it actually means to take a knife and to cut. Imagine cutting someone's name into the palm of your hand. Or I love what the Living Bible says in the paraphrase version. It says, I have tattooed you on the palm of my hand. Isn't that an incredible thought? The God of this universe has tattooed you and me on his hand. We've tattooed his name there. Why? Because he wants to remember us. And my friend, you are worth more than many sparrows. And I am here to tell you this morning that part of being changed is an absolute assurance. You and I can know here today that God doesn't forget us. I was thinking about myself, this verse a bit more, and I thought, what is the really critical application? I focused on the words at the end where it said, don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. I really wallowed in it, and I looked up the word afraid in the Greek, and the word afraid is the word phobos, not a word that we use too much, at least in our societies, but it literally means fear. And I wouldn't mind betting that some of you sitting here this morning, from time to time, you know what it's like to be gripped by fear. You know what that's like. Maybe nobody else is aware of it, but you know what it's like. Here's what I want to share with you. The next time that you feel fear, think sparrow. When you feel fear, think sparrow. Why? Because God doesn't forget the sparrow. He will not forget you. And despite what the fear is that you might be facing at this present time or next week or next month, you need to remember that he will never, ever forget you, even in the midst of your fear. I've been thinking even deeper about this, and I wonder how often is it that people are afraid that God has forgotten them. And they would tell you that there is good reason for God forgetting them. Why? Because they have done something where they feel as though God deserves to forget them. They've made choices in life, or they've behaved in a certain way which they know has seen them mess up and go against God, even as a Christian. And so they say to themselves, well, you know what? God has got a right to forget me. I deserve to be forgotten. And if that's you this morning, even just for a moment in time, you say, there's things I've done in life, and I wouldn't blame God if he forgot me. My friend, you need to get hold of this. Let me take you a little verse in Mark 16. And you remember the story, Jesus, after he was crucified, and they took him and they put him in the tomb. And on the Sunday morning, there was two ladies that walked out to the tomb. One of them was Mary Magdalene, and the other one was also Mary, was the mother of James. And they walked out to the tomb, and even on the way out, they're chatting amongst themselves and say, hey, how are we going to move the great rock in front of the tomb when we get there? You know, yeah. But of course they didn't need to worry about it, because when they got there, here's the stone, it's been rolled away. And they go to the tomb, and no Jesus there, he's gone. And they're met by, you know the story, they're met by an angel. And the angel says to them, hey, you looking for Jesus? He's not here, he's risen. Both the Marys are kind of blown away and, you know, mouth open like a, you know, frog in a hailstorm. Yeah, unbelievable. And here's what the angel says to them. He says, go tell his disciples and Peter that Jesus has gone on into Galilee. You kind of read that verse and you go, oh yeah, well, that's pretty sensible, isn't it? Yeah, you just, a verse that probably many of you have read numbers of times. And you read it and you go, yeah, go tell his disciples and Peter. Yeah. And then I looked at it. And I thought, yeah, that's really interesting. Why those last two words? Last time I checked, Peter was one of the disciples, right? So why would you say, go and tell his disciples and Peter? Why would you do that? Why would you kind of single him out? Why wouldn't you just say, go and tell the disciples? Kind of sounds really weird. And it's, you know, this is God sending a message via an angel. Remember that the word angel actually means messenger. And the messenger, the angel, specifically says, and Peter, like it doesn't really make sense, does it? Or does it? Think about it for a moment. Here's Peter, absolutely thinking about his own setting where here is a guy who has literally cursed Jesus' name. He's lied about him. He's denied him. He's completely disconnected himself from being a friend of Jesus. And here is Peter, absolutely riddled with guilt. After all that Jesus has done for me, look what I've done for him. I deserve to be forgotten. And here's Peter. Yeah, there could not be a worse kind of a setting. And so Jesus sends the message via the angel, and he says, go and tell his disciples and Peter. Why did he do that? Because he wanted Peter to know that he hadn't been forgotten. My friend, he wants you to know that you haven't been forgotten. He cannot forget you. And some of you sit here this morning and you feel very much as though you deserve to be forgotten. Your past, whether it's more recent or in the more distant past, you say, God can't forgive me. I don't blame him for forgetting me. My friend, he will never forget you. He cannot forget you. It was in the spring of 1905, and a couple by the name of Dr. and Mrs. Martin were holidaying in Elmira in New York. And they were staying with another couple who sounded like they came right out of a fairy tale, Dr. and Mrs. Doolittle. And Mrs. Doolittle was an incredible couple. Mrs. Doolittle was a lady who had been, for the last 20 years, bedridden. Had not been able to get out of bed for 20 years. True story. And I don't know about you, sometimes I don't mind a sleep in, but 20 years might be a little over the top. 20 years she'd been in bed. Incredible. And her husband was an incurable cripple, wheelchair bound. He couldn't get out of his wheelchair. In fact, he ran his business from a wheelchair. And here's this couple. You kind of look at them and you say, wow, and yet somehow they just radiated this incredible joy and sense of purpose as they determined that they would live for Jesus despite their inadequacies. And the Martins came and they stayed in their home and they were just absolutely, I don't know if you use this word in Australia, we use the word gobsmacked. It's like, you know, absolutely gobsmacked that this couple could just love life as much as they did and had come to grips with their extraordinary disabilities. And they watched them for a while, and Mrs. Martin overheard a conversation between her husband, Dr. Martin, and Mrs. Doolittle. And they're talking, it's just amazing. And he says, and it's typical 1905 vernacular, so work with me on this. He asks her this question, amazing question. He says, why is it that you are of such a happy disposition? And Mrs. Doolittle responds very simply. She says, his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. And Mrs. Martin was so moved by those words that upon return to home, within hours of returning to her home, she penned the words of that well-known hymn, "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." Do you know that this morning? Do you know without a shadow of a doubt that his eye is not only on the sparrow, his eye is watching you? Do you know that he cannot forget the sparrow? He cannot forget you. Do you know that your name is engraved on the palm of his hand? My friend, it doesn't matter where you have been or what you have done. God cannot forget you. And a fundamental part of you and I being changed people is saying, God, I recognise you can never forget me. And I'm not going to forget you. Trevor's going to come and he's going to sing that very song for us. And while he's singing, can I challenge you to do this? Can I challenge you to listen intently to the words that he sings, the words of the song? His eyes on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. And as you sit there and you hear the words of the song, you may even like to close your eyes. Two questions that you want to ask yourself, can I suggest? One is, if it is that I think God has forgotten me, maybe I can change that this morning, and you can. With what we've talked about in the last few minutes, has God forgotten you? No, he hasn't. And maybe the accompanying question is, have you forgotten God? And if you have, what better moment this morning here at 7 SD Church to say, righto God, it's time to stop forgetting you.